One of the biggest races of 24 hours of the Nürburgring.
There's Verstappen to the top of the screen.
Listen guys, before we dive in, let me show you something that actually shocked me when I was going through the data. Max Verstappen showed up to the Nürburgring 24 hours qualifying and basically turned the whole session upside down, survived a chaotic crash incident that took out his own teammate, and still put Team Verstappen Racing on the second row of the grid. Hold on, because today we are breaking down exactly how all of that happened, who drove what, and whether P4 is actually good enough to fight for the win. So let's start from the very beginning.
The four-time world champion has had around the Nürburgring Nordschleife.
Because TQ1 tells you a lot about how smart this team operates. The track was incredibly green, meaning barely any rubber on the surface, and the first cars out there were basically sliding around on what felt like ice. There were early spins, there were near misses, and honestly the conditions were rough for everyone trying to push hard. Now, Team Verstappen Racing sent Lucas Auer out in the number 3 Mercedes for this session, and that was a deliberate decision. Auer's job was never to set a heroic lap time. His job was to gather information, understand how the track was evolving, and simply make sure the team moved through to TQ2. He did exactly that, posting an 8 minutes and 14.8 seconds, which put him in P5 and comfortably inside the cut. When he came back to the pits, the real value was in the feedback he handed over to Max Verstappen, who was already getting ready to go out. That handover moment right there was actually one of the smartest things this team did all qualifying. Now this is where the session gets genuinely wild. Because TQ2 started with a massive shock that nobody saw coming. Maro Engel, driving the number 80 Mercedes, crashed out on his very first push lap. Not a small incident either. We are talking about a proper accident that brought out double yellow flags and triggered a code 60, which means every driver going through that section of the Nordschleife had to slow down to 60 kilometers per hour. For a track T, that long, that basically ruins your lap completely. The reason this changed everything for Verstappen specifically is because of where he was on track at that exact moment. He was ahead of Engel, which meant he had already cleared that section before the yellows came out. So while everyone behind was losing time, Verstappen was pushing forward into cleaner air on a track that was now warming up nicely.
You know, is there rain involved or not? That will make it a lot harder. As fast as you can without taking too many risks.
That is the kind of detail that separates good qualifying strategies from great ones. With all that chaos behind him and a clear road ahead, Verstappen put in a lap that immediately grabbed everyone's attention. An 8 minutes and 14.4 seconds, which put him straight into P1 and a full second faster than the next closest driver. On a circuit like the Nordschleife where tenths of seconds feel massive, a full second gap is genuinely impressive.
Success is winning. I think that's very simple. That's why we're here.
However, because of those yellow flags, he had no choice but to return to the pits after just one lap.
Half-hour session began with a shock, crashed out on his first push lap in a very uncharacteristic mistake.
His session was not done yet though, because with 5 minutes left on the clock, the safety crew cleared the wreck, fresh tires went on, and every car went back out for a one-lap shootout to decide the 7 drivers advancing to TQ3. This part is where it got properly tense for Team Verstappen Racing. Verstappen was one of the first drivers to complete his lap in the shootout and set a time of 8 minutes and 11.6 seconds, which at that moment put him in P2. But there were still plenty of fast cars on hot laps, including Yellowly and Krones, who both went quicker and pushed Verstappen down to P6 by the end of the session. P6 sounds uncomfortable, but here is the thing. He was 1.1 seconds off the absolute pace and still had around 3.5 tenths in hand between himself and the elimination zone. The team was through, and that is honestly all that mattered at that point.
Well, that's why we're here, winning.
Sometimes surviving a chaotic session cleanly is the win. So now it is TQ3, the pole shootout, and this time it is Dani Juncadella behind the wheel of the number 3 Mercedes. The format here is brutal. Cars go out in 20-second intervals with full fuel loads, and they get exactly 2 laps to set their best time. There is nowhere to hide and no margin for error. Juncadella's first lap came in at 8 minutes and 18.5 seconds, which left the team sitting in P10 after the first runs were complete. That is a seriously uncomfortable position when you know the second lap is your last chance. But this is exactly where Juncadella showed his quality, because his final lap was a completely different story. He crossed the line within 8 minutes and 12 seconds, a clinical and composed effort that put the number 3 Mercedes provisionally on the front row of the grid. In the end, the Lamborghini of Lucas Auer grabbed pole position, and an all-Lamborghini front row was confirmed, with an Audi also slotting in ahead. Team Verstappen Racing ended up in P4, which is exact LY where they will start Saturday's race. Here is my honest take on this. P4 at the Nürburgring 24H is a genuinely solid position to be starting from. You are close enough to the front that you can attack early if things go your way, but you are also not in the firing line of all the first lap madness that tends to unfold at the start of a race this long. Verstappen himself said after qualifying that he felt comfortable and was satisfied with how the session played out, and given everything that happened, that makes complete sense. So to bring everything together, what we saw across all 3 qualifying phases was actually a really well-managed effort from Team Verstappen Racing. Auer did his job in TQ1 by gathering data and making the cut without taking unnecessary risks. Verstappen turned TQ2 chaos into a clean advancement by being in the right place at the right time and then delivering when the shootout came. And Juncadella rescued TQ3 with a composed final lap under serious pressure. 3 drivers, 3 very different challenges, 1 P4 result. My personal opinion is that this team has the pace to make things interesting at the front if the race distance plays into their hands, and the Nürburgring always throws enough surprises to make that very possible. Now here is the question I want to leave you with. Given that the front row is locked out by Lamborghini and an Audi sits in P3, do you actually think a Mercedes can win this race? Or is the gap just too big to close over 24 hours? Drop your answer in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.